The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Joe. So, Joe, if you could tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe to me what it was like, where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received. So
Sure.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim. It's good to be here. My name is Joe Telustis, which is a hard one to pronounce. I was born January 21st, 1961 in Forestburg, South Dakota, which is a small farming community in east central South Dakota. Both sides of my family are from there. I'm fourth generation on my dad's side and fifth generation on my mother's. All four of my grandparents went to school together. Three of them graduated from high school together in a class of 9. My favorite picture of my parents is a picture of my dad and my mother and my Aunt Shirley, my mom's sister Shirley. My dad is 5 years old. My mom is 4 and Shirley's 3. They were farm neighbors, lived about 1.5 miles apart. When I was about 2 years old, my dad was a school superintendent, a public school superintendent. And we ended up moving to Minnesota, and that's where I started elementary school. And it was a small farming community of about 2,100 people, very prosperous farming community, about 20 miles outside of Rochester, Minnesota, which some people may be familiar. That's the home to the Mayo Clinic. With one of the world's renowned medical centers. Grew up in I guess what would be quote unquote pretty normal childhood. I graduated from high school in 1979. I went to the place. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about Plainview. It was in a time in the 1970s where you could be fairly worldly and somewhat traveled, yet be very naive about a lot of things. I always say normally we measure time in BC and AD.
Yeah.
Familiar with those? I measure time in BC and AC, before cable and after cable. Because you could be, your world could be pretty tight, even if you had traveled around a bit. So, and it was kind of the story of my life that I was very knowledgeable and worldly in some areas and oblivious in others. And that played definitely into both my career and my recognizing mental health issues as time went along. Mm-hmm. After high school, I went to college at Mankato State University in Mankato, Minnesota. My degree is in business and economics. All I knew for sure when I got out of there, and I did well, loved going to school, all I knew for sure was I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I had been dabbling in the radio world since I was 17. I started working. It was a part-time weekend job at a very small radio station in Wabasha, Minnesota, which is on the Mississippi River, but never thought of it as a career. But yet, every time things kept popping up and opportunities kept popping up, and when I was in college, I suddenly found myself in a full-time radio job. So I was doing full-time radio and full-time study. Graduated with honors. Decided I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I ended up here.
How did that work? I mean, you say full-time radio. Is that you had a show every day, or?
Yep. Every Monday through Friday, I would go to my first college class was at about 10 in the morning, and I would study during the day. I would get into the studio about 5 o'clock, and I would do commercial production, and preparation for a show, and then the show would start at 7 p.m. and ended at 12:30 in the morning, and then I would go back and start it all over again. So it kept me busy.
So what were you talking about on that show? I mean, that's a long time to have a radio show.
It is. Well, that show was a music show. So there was a lot of music on that show, and early on, that's what I did. It was later in my career, first doing a morning show, actually here in.
Well, let's concentrate on that first show.
Oh, sure. Yep.
So predominantly a music show. So you start at 7 in the evening. What was the format of the show? So obviously at the top of the hour you'll start with news.
Mm-hmm.
How did your radio wheel pan out on that?
It was what was called at the time a adult contemporary, or maybe even a hot adult contemporary, kind of a top 40 station of the time. And this is about 1981, 82. And so it was a lot of music. I live in a part of the world where weather is important. The weather's always important, where the weather can kill you.
Oh yeah.
And so that's this part of the world. It can at times, but primarily it was a music discovery show, and you would play hits and oldies and local music and a lot of different things. But it was pretty much a straight DJ show. So at that point, but I'm about 21 at the time. I don't know that I was that interesting yet. So that was just fine.
So was it commercial then? Because you obviously have to put in commercials. What was the breakdown between the music and the commercials that you had to put in?
At that station,
how many minutes an hour did you have to have commercials to make it viable for the station?
At that station, probably around 10 to 12 minutes an hour, depending on the hour, which was a lot. And although not the most I had ever done. So there were stops. You might play 3 or 4 songs in a row before you'd stop down and for a break. So that's roughly how it broke down.
So what was your typical patter as being a DJ? Go on and give us an example of how you
goodness.
Then would
a long time ago.
A song. Go on.
That's a long time ago. Let's see. Oh boy. Been a long time since I thought about this. Oh gosh, it was. Let's see. I can even get the call letters right. I was still using my real name then, so it was like hi, I'm Joe Telustis. You are listening to KEEZ 99.1 in Mankato, Minnesota. Here comes now up the latest from Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. I'm not sure. It's been a long time.
Push the slider up and away it goes.
Yep, away we go.
So were you? I guess back then it would have been sort of vinyl. So you put the vinyl on, you cue it up yourself. I mean, did you do all the button presses and everything, or did you have producers in the background and all you had to do is talk?
That one was just me. And we were still playing vinyl. We were kind of half and half for songs that were played a lot, which would be kind of the top 20, 25. Yeah. Those would be on a cartridge, if you remember an old tape cartridge. Yeah. And then the vinyl would be the rest of it. And I wish I had one of those turntables today. It was a Technics SL 1200, and I would love to have one today. They're a little out of my price range today because it was the turntable that DJs, hip hop DJs, kept alive when vinyl kind of went away. These things were, I mean, you've been around radio a little bit, as have I, and I mean this thing was a tank. I mean you could throw it down the stairs and it would work. I mean it was really, really tough. But it was pretty simple actually. It was very nice, a brand new building that I was in at the time, and so and everything was integrated from the turntables to the card machines to sliders and the whole work. So, but yeah, it was just little old me every night.
Yeah, and can you remember sort of, did that pay enough to pay for your your college?
It helped a lot. I mean, as I look back, I was just mentioning that to somebody the other day. I think I started with the princely sum of $700 US a month, and but also living expenses were pretty cheap. Going to college at the time, I shared a 2-story house with 4 guys on the upper story, and so my expenses were very low. And actually, education at that time was not horribly expensive, not like it is today. It was a state university. And so my previous job in the summers back in my hometown was the main employer there was a vegetable cannery. It was a part of the country where you grew a lot of sweet corn and green peas. And it was beautiful country for that. And it always seemed to rain enough, and the soil was so black, I think you could put sticks in it and trees would grow. I mean, it was just very fertile. And I worked outside. I never worked in the factory, but I worked out in the fields getting samples that I would take back to my lab, and I would test them for maturity. So, and all we did was work. We worked 7 days a week, and from like 5:30 in the morning until 5:30 in the afternoon. And so we didn't have any time to spend money or get into too much trouble, because all your friends were doing it too. And that really was what paid for college, because I could make enough in a summer to pay for a year of college.
That's good. So let's have a look then. So how you graduated college? What was your major in it again? Economics and business studies.
Business and economics.
Yeah.
And I knew I'll backtrack just a step, and that is as life has gone on, there's kind of 2 kinds of people. There are destination people and journey people. And destination people have their eyes on a prize. They have a goal, and they're driving towards this goal to do something in particular. And all the things they do work in that direction. Then there's journey people who are there for the journey, for the adventure, and not really having, somebody said, my goal's 5 years from now. All I can guarantee is if I'm alive, I'll be 5 years older. And other than that, it's enjoying the journey. And if I was born with a gift, it was a gift of curiosity, which I got from my mother. And whatever sense of humor I have, I also got from she was still alive. She's 89. She lives about a mile from where I'm sitting right now. So, she's something else. But I found out much later that really what I was a destination person, or I was a journey person. And so I've never really known what was coming next. Yet everything that I've done and everything that I learned along the way was always useful. It always was a piece of something onto the next adventure. And it was, and we can talk more about that later, but I ended up finding myself in very interesting places. And the one thing I can tell you is that I cannot remember the last day I was bored. I'm 62 years old. It might have been in college somewhere where it was a rainy Saturday, and I might have been slightly hungover. I don't know. Watching television, but I am never bored. Absolutely never bored.
I kind of know that feeling. I'm a journey person myself. Still don't know where I'm going.
Oh, me too. People say, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I have but man, what a ride. I mean, it has been
absolutely
been something else.
So what did you do after you graduated then?
Well,
what was the next step? Did you carry on at a radio station, or?
Well, I not by plan, but that's kind of the way it went. Unemployment was at 10%. The economy was really goofy. Interest rates were very high. All of those things, were coming into play, and I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. So I ended up wandering. Yeah, great combination. It's a path to success. But I ended up coming back to South Dakota, to Sioux Falls, where I live today. And was kind of like one thing led to another. I knew a friend here in the industry, and I started doing some part-time hours at another music station. Pretty soon it was a full-time job. Pretty soon it was a morning show, and I'm like 22 and making it up as I went along. And it was a marvelous run, and had a lot of fun. And station had gone to number one in the market. And the morning show, I was at a guy who at the time I thought was really old. My perspective is a little different today. I almost had the number one morning show. So me being me, that was my sign to leave. And so I was going to go to grad school. I was going to be a teacher because I come from a family of teachers. And I got a call from a consultant. I was accepted and was all set to start at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And I got a call from a consultant that I had met in New York. And he said, have you ever thought about programming a station? And I said, well, yeah, I guess anybody who has worked at a station will say, if I were running things, this is how I would run it. And so before I knew it, here I was. And say, ever heard of Rochester, Minnesota? And I said, well, yeah, I'm quite familiar. I grew up 20 miles from there. And so at 25, I got my first programming job and turned the station into a news and talk station, turned myself into a talk show host, and had 14 wonderful years there. I mean, it was another example of kind of, it was another commercial station that had been on the air since 1935. And I really grew up there. And it was funny because all these years, most of my years in the radio business, I was the young guy. I always said I was managing people who were older than me. And now I'm the old guy, which is good.
Are you still managing the older people?
Or
you're bringing in fresh blood?
Today, by choice, I don't manage anybody, which I am perfectly fine with. And it was always the least favorite part of the job was managing people. Coaching people and discovering talent and things was really fun. Managing people, that was kind of the headache part. But that was a marvelous day, and it was really formative. I learned a lot. I've been fortunate, as most people who are successful have mentors, and they have people that they saw something in me before I saw something in me. They gave me a shot. And so it was a marvelous 14 years. Wow.
So the start of that 14 years, so you got recruited into this station, and was it a music station before, or was it always a talk news station?
A lot of stations like this, back in the day, they called them full service stations. You were very much a community station. So you did bits of everything, from news and weather to music to interviews to especially being there when there was some kind of catastrophe, a weather event, or there was some kind of emergency in the area. You were the conduit for information through that. When there were elections, I talked to candidates. When there were people coming through town, and they actually did quite a bit in Rochester with the Mayo Clinic being there. People came from all over the world, and so it was a really a unique thing to be able to talk to people as they were coming in. When a lot of times they were coming in and wanted to be very private, so you did a little bit of everything. And I kind of found myself and I kind of like that, because there was always an element there of not only entertainment, but information and community service. And it was, I always cared about people. And so I cared about people in my community where I was. And so part of it was a real service thing for me. And it's funny, as the years have gone on, I've kind of stayed the same person. Where the world is philosophically at a time, it changes all the time. I mean, I've been in places where I've been the arch conservative for an entire community, and then I've been when I came back to South Dakota, I ran the public radio network, and I was this big leftist, and I'm the same guy. I'm the same guy I've always been, and so it's all pretty relative.
So let's have a little bit of a look at that station that you were recruited into. Now, did you have your own show? Did you how did you go about changing things?
I did. It was an interesting job, and I was lucky to be young because it took a lot of horsepower to do all the things that I did. I would come in the morning, and the morning show would be on. So I was managing and coaching the morning show, and then my show started at 9:30 in the morning. So I had to suddenly switch gears. I had to switch into performance mode, and I was on from 9:30 until 1. And then I would switch back into
a long time to
yeah, it was
for a show. So
yep. And really didn't have a producer then either. So I really had to hustle. But I was young and I loved it. I mean, I had the energy to do it, and it was definitely a make it up as you go along thing. And it was interesting. And there were parts that played into later on in my life that I actually understood about me in the radio business before I understood in me as a human being. And part of that is that when you would switch gears from being, a manager and a programmer to a host, and then back into management things, is that there were times when I was a nervous wreck. This is the time in my life. Well, it was a time in my life when, I talked about before as being worldly about some things and very naive about others. I had no idea the amount of anxiety that I was carrying around on a daily basis. Because why would I think that I was any different than anybody else? As far as I knew, everybody was a nervous wreck every day, and that, I'm just like anybody else, so I better suck it up and do it. But it was you went from one mindset to all of a sudden you had to throw it over, and then you had to throw it back. And and one day I walked in the studio and I said, I was probably by this time, I'm in my early, about 33. I've been doing this for a while. And I finally just said, it occurred to me one day, I said, okay, you have a choice that you can either be a nervous wreck every day for the rest of your life, or you can be yourself and have enough confidence in yourself to just be you. And if people like it, they like it. And if they don't, they don't. Yeah. That's when the show really took off. And that's when it really was fun. I didn't get that part in my personal life for another 14 years. So, it was, had I been maybe a little more self-aware, because you were so much in the moment, I could have saved myself a lot of grief had I been able to get that earlier.
So let's just have a look. Let's explore that a little bit. Let's have a look. So you've got you're programming this radio station. So you've got the early morning show, the breakfast show, and then you're coming on mid-morning. Mm-hmm. So if you're busy with the early morning show, helping them along, etc., and then you've got to come in at 9:30 onto your show, and you're going till 1. So if it's primarily a talk show, how do you have a phone in? Do you have subjects each day? How do you prepare your show for each day? And how do you set it up? How do you get yourself there to be able to manage yourself before you get producers and production assistants and stuff like that? Did you have a production assistants that were feeding you what the main subject for the day was, or how did that work?
Well, I would, you were in kind of constant preparation mode. You really, every waking hour that you were around, you were paying attention to what was going on in the world, which was a blessing and a curse, because you had to stay so plugged in. You almost said, okay, well, where's the room for a regular life here? So I would start probably the afternoon before, if I had, early in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I usually had a guest, and I would set up, and it might be, soup to nuts. It might have been somebody local. It might have been an author. It might have been somebody that was, happened to be a celebrity visiting town, all of those kind of things. Thursday, I did a back and forth kind of a current event show with a history professor from the local college. And so that was probably our most popular thing, because and he was a lot older than I was. Of course, I was a young guy again. And, but we had a great affection for each other, and we saw the world similarly in some areas and very differently in others, but we always respected each other, and we always had a lot of laughs. But it was kind of, I don't know, I'm not bragging, but it was kind of heady. I mean, it was, by that time, when I had faith in myself, I decided to really use the brain in my head, and really try to think things through, and have it be time spent that was not bombastic or was not manufactured. I've always tried to make it very authentic, to make who I am. And then Friday, we had an open phone show, and it was whatever came up, and that was kind of a free for all. Some days it was very clear what people wanted to talk about, if there was a big story, or sometimes it was all over the place. But I kind of liked that. I liked, I have a goofy side. I have a well-read side. I've got a philosophical side. I've got, all these things. So it did give you a chance to kind of reach out. But yeah, those days you were, probably the half hour before the show started was the craziest, because I would have a guest set, but I had to organize quickly in my head, how I was going to start, what was going to be in the middle, and how you're going to end. So what I would do every day is actually write out a bullet point outline for whoever the guest was that I was talking to, and just the process of putting the outline together was usually enough. The only thing I had to go back for was the person's name, and if they had a book or whatever, because my short-term memory it wasn't great then. It was one day I said, I was thinking about my short-term memory. I was going back in my prime, and then I stopped and I said, I'm not sure I had a prime when it came to short-term memory. But, that's that process of kind of organizing things to put it down into bullets usually was enough. And then after that, it really became, and this was a big teaching point that I used with other people, is you had to listen. Because quite often the show you prepared for and the show you ran into, the one you ran into was more interesting than the one you prepared for, if you were listening and if you were paying attention to what you, as the interviewer, was reacting to. And that's one thing I have with today's young TV reporters, is that they're so overly prepared that they'll ask their first question, and then immediately they'll go down to their notes and look at their second question and not listen because the real story may be something you discover. Quite often it's something you discover if you're paying attention.
Yeah. And just to show I was paying attention, so you had this, I guess, an epiphany. You came in one day and you figured, why am I getting so stressed out?
Mm-hmm.
And then how did that change your approach?
As far as the on-air part of things, it was a lot more fun. It was a lot more relaxed. It was very much more authentic. It was more of who I am, or at least coming from my perspective. It became easier to access my own curiosity. It became easier to access my own history and background stories, things that I had experienced, all of which, by the way, goes into my present job all the time when I'm working with people with addictions. Uh, so it really loosened things up, and I realized I didn't need to know everything going in. That
Mm.
along with the audience, I would be at times discovering what was going on, and that was by so I would try to get somebody that I was interested in, and ask them questions that whatever I wanted, usually from a curiosity point of view. And so hopefully I was learning as time went on. Hopefully the audience was learning something too.
Yeah. I think the key that I tell people is that you've got two of these, one of these, and there's a host. That's how you use them.
Yep. Very true. Very true. It can be an extremely ego-driven enterprise, and I never had a lot of that. I did, which made me different. And and when I got to Minneapolis and did a big time show, a big time, I was programming. I did a little bit on air work, but was mostly programming. All of a sudden, I learned all what ego was about, and it was the best of times and the worst of times. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned there that you were working with people with problems. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Especially when I went to the Twin Cities, especially.
Yeah. I'll tell you for why I ask is that I do a live show on a Thursday called Everyday Conversations regarding mental health. And we cover all different aspects of mental health. So I'm interested to see how you got into that.
Sure. Well, it kind of was two-pronged, and I'll go with the job part first. And I inherited a radio station that was very successful and was very innovative in that there weren't a lot of quote unquote radio people there. Most of the people that were there and most of the people I recruited as I went along were people who they were very smart. They had been successful in other fields, and they had ego and wanted to be a radio star because it was a big 50,000 watt, big radio station, and it covered all kinds of territory. So, and there was innovation in that because a lot of times they didn't know what they didn't know, but that wasn't necessarily bad because they were very inventive and would do things that were very different, very unique. And because they were from the area, it was also, had some kind of a feel for the place, as it were. But I found that the personality elements that made them great on the air made them an absolute nightmare to try to manage. And I can honestly say, I mean, I had hosts on that station and I think I had a total of 35. Wow. And half of those were part-time. But my main group, and they had producers and they had, everything that you would ever think of, their production staff and the whole works. And I'm not exaggerating and I'm not doing anything, about a quarter of them probably should have been in an institution. And I mean, because they were, if I couldn't believe the stuff that and this was a family-owned company, big family-owned company that was in the television and radio business and had been great innovators. They had done an amazing number of firsts, including putting a satellite into space, mortgaging the entire company, buying a rocket, buying a satellite on the thought that someday people might pay money to have TV programming delivered to their house by a satellite. And that company eventually became DirecTV, which was kind of a big deal in this country. So And along the way, they invented the satellite truck. And so, I mean, these are very innovative people.
Yeah.
But the amount of time I spent in human resources, and yet the amount of stuff that people had been allowed to get away with was a very strange situation, because a precedent had been set before I got there for behavior. And the precedent is there was basically no limits on behavior and off air. And that was really tough. I had a woman. This is what I inherited. I inherited a morning show that was extremely dysfunctional and not very successful. And it was, the star of the show was a woman who had been successful on the station about a decade before. And it was because she had no filter whatsoever. Very intelligent, very smart, was reacting to things in the world all the time, but it went directly from here to here, and with no thought in between. And I mean, she had as absent a filter as ever. So by the time I got there, when it was interesting kind of like driving by a car wreck. I mean, it was very bad. She really did not like men. And so my predecessor had put her on the air with 4 men. So, I mean, it was just a nightmare. And one day she was, at the time, was in her late 60s, and she was predisposed to periods of flat out rage. And I mean, yelling, screaming, red-faced rage. And a true story. One day she's coming down, after the show, she's coming down the hallway, and she is just livid and just out of control. And she's walking with a cane at the time. Then she comes into the office, and she's very much talked with her hands. So she's got a cane in one of them, and she's flailing around, and and I'm having to do this, and she's knocking out ceiling tiles. And true story, at the peak of her rage, her teeth came out and went across the table. And she did not lose a beat. She just kept going. And so, in different ways, I had different people.
Tune in next time to find out what happens with Joe's story.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.